Okay, so we're going to do a quick overview of how to um, use NSX with TKG with NSX. Yeah, so quick overview. So again, so we have a tier 0 gateway, we have a tier 1 gateway. You're going to have to make two segments, and I'll make diagrams of this in a second. We'll walk through. So it looks a little bit like this. So again, this is a kind of technical overview for people. So this is not, I'm not going to go through the basics of TKG and all that, but TKG, so you have your, or cluster cuddle for that matter, you have your Bastion node, which is going to be something where you have TKG or cluster cuddle installed, and you're on a network, an arbitrary network. In this case, we're going to call it 10 dot whatever 10.160.62, and that's going to have access to a vSphere instance, and you assume your vSphere instance is going to be on a subnet that's kind of like readily accessible, right? So in this case, I have a VLAN. The VLAN's giving me IP addresses on the 192 range. And so I can just talk to that, directly from my Bastion node, and I can tell it to make a few VMs. And now those VMs are going to come up behind a T1 line that's behind a T0 that's behind my VLAN, right? I'm going to show you how that plumbing works in a second, but ultimately those VMs are going to be on the 12 subnet over here, the /24 on the far right, and the Bastion is going to talk to those VMs on that 12 subnet. We'll show you how to do that plumbing in a second. So the overall network architecture on the far right here, you could see is that you have a T1 gateway, you have a tier 0 gateway, and you have a segment behind those, and you might have multiple VMs that are cluster API provisioned underneath that segment, right? So if you look at this from a Terraform perspective, this looks something like this, right? Well, first we create a DHCP server, right? And that's going to be 12.12.29.2, and so that's going to be its IP address. That's going to be kind of like a default DHCP server, which our VMs use to get their IP addresses. And we are going to then create these VMs inside of this segment at the bottom here. That's like this web tier segment that we mentioned, and those are going to be on that 12.12.1.1/24 subnet. Now they're going to have a DHCP server, which we define here. That's important because some of these VMs are going to need internet access. The VMs are going to need internet access because some of the containers of the cluster API need to be pulled from the internet. Like, for example, your CNI provider and the cert manager and stuff like that. So, so we can see the DHCP configuration inside of that segment, right? To use that 192.168.111.155 DNS server. That DNS server actually happens to be my jumper VLAN, which is literally the Bastion. So I have a DNS server on that Bastion I could just use. But you could have any DNS server there, of course, right? The DHCP server address for that segment is also defined as 12.12.99.2, as you can see there, and you can see that here as well. We have that DHCP server IP address there. So now we have our T0, we have our T1 gateway. The T1 gateway, all it does is connect that segment to the T0 gateway, and then that 192.168.115.21 IP address, you're going to need to take a quick note of that, because that .21 IP address ultimately is the gateway that we need to add to our jumper, which is our jump box, whatever your Bastion is, that's going to be, but you're going to be running your TKG Bootstrapper on, right? And so that command looks like something like this: IP route add 12.12.1.0/24 to 192.168.115.21. So I'll go back again so you can look at that diagram. You can see it on the far right. Okay, so yeah, oh, I forgot I actually had the diagram on both slides. Okay, yeah, anyways. So ultimately, our installation process looks a little bit like this. There's no special environment variables here, right? These are just standard sort of CAPV, TKG environment variables. So yeah, there's no specific NSX configuration here. So the steps you need to understand are the load balancer comes up first, right? Once the load balancer comes up, then the API. Now that load balancer is going to come up at the bottom here, and this where these 6 VMs are at the bottom here. Then the API server is going to come up. Once the API server comes up, then that bootstrapper is going to send traffic through the load balancer on the 12 subnet through that 192 gateway into the API server in order to move the management cluster over to Vsphere from your local con cluster that's set up on your jump box. And as we mentioned, DNS access you need from the nodes. Finally, it looks something like this. That's what you get, right? So you get all these VMs coming up inside of this 12 subnet. That's it. So not too hard. So again, here's like what the Terraform might look like to set this up, right? There's nothing super fancy here, and you can this is based on NSX T3 because NSX 2 didn't have the Terraform bindings didn't have access to these DNS the same DNS parameters that we need. They don't have those bindings in the NSX 2.5 API for I don't know whether it's due to the API or because the Terraform just didn't implement it. They didn't implement that in their Terraform recipes. But either way, you need 3.0 to use these Terraform modules to do this. Yeah, that's it. So thank you.